What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
Jeremy Mack is back on the program. Jeremy from the Phoenix Project, which is researching how the right is funding and plotting to make San Francisco a place where a few rich people make all of the important decisions. Phoenix Project launched not too long ago after this very podcast, and we met early on after its conception. So I have a brotherly affection for Jeremy and Phoenix, which recently dropped a new report called The Rise and Fall of the Doom Loop. Doom loop is a word that didn't exist before 2022, but over the past couple of years, you couldn't really escape it in San Francisco. Basically, this narrative about the city being a crime and fentanyl-ridden hellhole that was a victim of progressive policies. It's a narrative that was fine-tuned here in San Francisco and is now being deployed in other cities. And it's a narrative that the right wing is trying to use to capture back some of the power that it felt it was losing. Some of the people responsible for the doom loop narrative are not friends of the podcast and have in fact spoken ill of me, like venture capitalist Gary Tan, Diane Yap from the Manhattan Institute and Friends of Lowell High School, and the people behind Neighbors for a Better SF and Together SF. RIP, they morphed into a new group called Blueprint SF. And someone else that these people don't have love for is Jeremy and the Phoenix Project, because they don't like being called out for these sketchy things that they do in the name of consolidating power. I'm very fortunate to have some of the sweetest friends, specifically Faye and Lavelle. Thank you for supporting this small attempt to push back on the Gary Tans of the world. And if you're not yet a subscriber, please go to patreon.com/SadFrancisco to join them in supporting the podcast. Jeremy, please remind people why we need the Phoenix Project and what it is.
Yeah. Well, first of all, good morning. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. As always, also apologies. I have a little bit of congestion, so could be a little nasally today.
Forgiven.
So it goes. We've had, the throes of winter here in San Francisco. Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why we need the Phoenix Project is I think there is a critical gap that's often being faced in political organizing and general both on the left, but in general political analysis as it relates to capacity to do research on elections. I think there's a lot of great advocacy groups that do incredible jobs, and activists individually who do great jobs in pushing forward different issues that they care about, and making it trying to bring it forward as this is an important topic to discuss and holding people accountable to it, creating platforms around it, etc. And that advocacy is super important. But often, what folks don't have capacity for, or it's deprioritized, or it becomes a means to an end, is doing some of the deep research, especially around tying together these networks of funders to candidates.
Yeah, you're giving people targets in many ways.
Yeah.
Kind of showing who, for lack of a better word, the villains are in a lot of the very problematic stories that we find ourselves amidst. We also have some shared haters. Gary
For sure.
Tan is one.
Yep.
Still gonna have 2025 is gonna be the year that Gary Tan made it known that I was his most deranged hater.
Okay, really?
So
that was that a tweet?
it was a tweet.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should like show behind us like your hate tweet
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
our hate tweet,
All
which
right.
is what is I think the best one that we've gotten to date from Tan was that the Phoenix Project is trying to drown the city in fentanyl and create violence against the innocent.
That's amazing. That's
Quote,
so
quote
good.
unquote. I was like, wow, I could not have made that one up.
That is a very great recommendation coming from Gary Tan, one of the local tech oligarchs who we have. You know, I have to say, like, one of the best things that you can do, I think, is distract some of these tech oligarchs who are doing a lot of damage to a lot of different communities. Anytime that is a distraction to them,
Yeah, totally.
I'm all for.
Totally. And I want to say a little bit also, like, Tan's, I think, particularly outspoken and easy target as it relates to astroturfing in San Francisco and the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And pushing forward right-wing initiatives.
He's very public about
He's very public.
what he's doing.
He's tweeting all the time.
He's got these profiles in the New York Times. He's
Right.
like ready to be interviewed.
Right, and he's also like he's part of the Palantir Mafia. He's a quote. One could call him a graduate of Palantir.
Right.
Amongst the whole class, including Joe Lonsdale and other tech oligarchs who have now Alex Karp, Palmer Luckey, who have emerged out of Palantir to become these like premier right wing tech billionaires,
Right.
or centimillionaires in Tan's case, coming up a little short, so to speak.
It really bugs him.
Really bugs him. But yeah, but in a similar way that we saw, as a previous iteration, the PayPal Mafia was like, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Jeremy Stoppelman, and Reid Hoffman were kind of like that past iteration, like kind of like mid 2000s, tech oligarchs or folks who have become tech oligarchs. And now we have this next generation of Palantir folks, with Gary Tan very much being one of those important folks within that. But and all to be said, like, they're a little bit easier to like pin on the wall and be like, oh yeah, like they're an important player. But I think for Phoenix Project, one of the things that I've really appreciated is that as we've looked at money in politics, we've unearthed kind of people who are playing these major roles, but really would love to stay in the shadows,
Right.
and keep out of the press, don't want attention on them,
Totally.
and make them into actually being like, hey, actually, like, these are incredibly influential players,
Right.
in shaping the right-wing move in San Francisco.
People who don't already have like their own YouTube channel, like Gary.
Right,
Yeah.
and are broadcasting themselves in the same way.
So that has been Gary 10 Minute. Our new feature here on the podcast.
Right. Gary 10 Minute.
And okay, so I think another reason, why like Phoenix Project, we could use y'all, is there are so many examples of like people who are looking at the relationships on the left, who are very well funded, and places like the Manhattan Institute, which is included in, amongst the sort of rogues gallery of rogues in the report that we're going to be talking about today. It's the latest from the Phoenix Project. It's called The Rise and Fall of the San Francisco Doom Loop. Mm-hmm. We're here to talk about the latest report. Mm-hmm. And it concerns a narrative that came to be known. You couldn't miss it over the past couple of years. Doom loop, which was a term that I had definitely not heard prior to like 2022. For those who escaped it, what is a doom loop, and when did you first hear that term?
Yeah. Well, so there's a good reason why you hadn't heard of it before 2022, and it's because the term itself was coined in 2022 by a Columbia professor, and I was pulling up my notes here. Columbia professor Stigen van Nieuwerburg, and apologies to Stigen if I'm butchering their name there, but they wrote a report in 2022 specifically on the doom loop and kind of coining that term, and the terminology and the kind of central part of Van Nieuwerburg's thesis here was that the pandemic essentially was causing what he termed a doom loop happening within downtown areas. And so what he meant by that is, like, because of pandemic, people are not working in person in the office. Because people aren't working in the offices, those offices are going to close down. Also, people are moving away from the urban center generally with COVID. The urban centers are becoming ghost towns. The urban centers and the downtown specifically have been the economic hub and the tax hub for a lot of cities. And so then once those businesses moved away, then that gets rid of the economic base, and then all of a sudden cities began to do this self self-destructive kind of spiral,
Right.
where all of a sudden think about, as we mentioned in the report, you can think about like Detroit in the 70s as being an example of that. It's like, oh, like auto industry moves away. Now people move away. Now the city doesn't have resources to keep itself up. And then it basically, goes bankrupt and implodes. Right. So that was kind of like this professor, Van Nieuwerburg's thesis for cities across the country. And then it was, then taken and applied, taken and run with most specifically in San Francisco.
And it's not just a term to describe like the real estate, the situation with commercial real estate and office space. It's also what those things kind of like allegedly lead to, which is homelessness, right? Like open air drug use, shoplifting gangs, quote unquote.
Well, and I think something that's important here is that, so Van Nieuwerburg's thesis was not about crime. It wasn't about, the destruction of cities vis-a-vis, like homelessness rates or what have you. It was mostly about like the cities themselves going bankrupt and like not being able to provide services. What then happened when the term was taken and run within San Francisco, which was first used by the Chronicle's Roland Lee in 2022, was essentially like taking this thesis of doom loop about, in the cities imploding, applying it to San Francisco, but then beginning to then use the term more broadly and stretch the term to mean more than just the city going into economic decline, but actually becoming, like saying, oh, actually, the city's becoming a cesspool of criminal behavior, homelessness, drug use, and that all being then synonymous with this doom loop terminology.
Right. And it's like, it's narrative building. Right. That, and you mentioned Roland Lee, who was is a Chronicle real estate reporter.
Yep.
And so like, it's about people who have platforms, sort of spreading this doom loop narrative around. That's a major part of why doom loop even exists, like in my vocabulary in 2025, is the concerted effort that we saw like people start to use around 2022 when it was coined, and to the point where Joe Rogan was doing podcasts about the state of San Francisco specifically. He's an Austin-based podcast. Why is he talking about San Francisco? And it's people nationally were starting to, in the media, to hold up San Francisco as this like no-go zone. And it was really weaponized. And my question to you, how was it weaponized? Against whom? Who did it benefit?
Yeah, so yeah, a lot of different layers here, but essentially, like the doom loop as a narrative, I think the first thing that's kind of ironic about the doom loop is that if Dion Lim, if Dion Lim from KGO, who also took and ran with it, but I think if these reporters and political commentators, so like I guess maybe starting with Roland Lee, were very serious, and then you can apply that to Heather Knight and other reporters who kind of also took this term and ran with it. If they were very serious about understanding why San Francisco was caught up in a doom loop as it relates to industry moving away and the abandoning of downtown and the fear around that and like what that would do to the city, if they're really serious about like that being the problem, then they would have looked at how we got into a position in the city where all of the city's economic eggs were in one basket, which is a tech basket.
Right.
And as soon as tech went remote and stopped being downtown, all of a sudden that sent the city into this shockwave. And if you want to look at who was responsible for, putting all of San Francisco's investments into economic, our economic engine and creating jobs, who put it all into the tech sphere, that would require you to hold people like Willie Brown accountable. It would require you to hold people like Gavin Newsom, Ed Lee, a whole string of, sort of conservative Democrat mayors of San Francisco, or kind of, self-described moderate mayors of San Francisco who kind of put the city into this economic position where we lack diversity in our investments, and in the different industries that traditionally have made the city economically vibrant. So I think off the bat, there was a deliberate distortion of the term away from looking at like, how did we get to a point where tech runs everything, and instead pivoting it to be like, oh, well, we're going to talk about the problems of downtown as it relates to, rising homelessness, like, unhoused folks being on the street.
Yeah.
Invisible homelessness. We're going to use this to relate to drug use and criminal behavior. And to then get to your question specifically of then how was it being used? Like what we found was, essentially the terminology itself was being used as a deliberate cudgel, as a tool by this rising conservative movement in San Francisco that really started to gain wind in 2020, 2021, what we term as the AstroTurf Network, a handful of political pressure organizations that are well funded by conservative billionaires.
Yeah.
These groups then started taking these terms and running with them to try to then take down progressives and to say, oh, well, if you don't like all this crime, putting a spotlight on crime, houselessness, and drug use, none of which were particularly hitting particularly high levels. Like if you look at the 20, 30, 40-year trends, like all those, like when you look at trends, especially for like criminal behavior or what have you, which you're looking specifically at like property crimes or violent crimes, all those were trending down.
Yeah.
But they used there was a period where there was a rise in between 2021 and 2022, and they used that as like to say, oh, look at this rising crime rate, look at the doom loop narrative, and this is all because of people like Chesa Boudin, who is a progressive district attorney who had been elected in 2019. This is all because of progressive supervisors like Dean Preston,
Right.
who was a Democratic Socialist in office in District 5. And so they used it very intentionally to become this like anti-progressive cudgel.
Yeah, I think that's totally correct. I mean, it's story. It's
Yeah.
like you said, narrative building. We're going to use that term a lot, probably, to manufacture consent for anti-progressive policies, for these like recall elections that happened around Chesapeake, around the school board, kind of like, blaming progressive policies, blaming lack of cops. There were like a few different areas that this narrative was used very effectively, to create a vibe that things were not as they seemed, I suppose, or maybe that's not correct. But to your point about like the crime rates, like to build a narrative that the crime rates, although line keeps going down when it comes to charts around crime rates, and especially violent crime rates, it's don't look at those charts. Like attention over here to this narrative that we're trying to build that will support our conservative policies, like hiring more police. We could talk about a few of these different groups. So we could talk about, Grow SF and Together SF. We've actually done some podcasts on before. People can check those out. I will link them in the show notes. But so we had these, local groups that were using this narrative, that were contributing to this narrative: Grow SF, Together SF, Neighbors for a Better SF. Those last two ended up that they no longer exist in those names, but they've sort of been reborn as Blueprint SF. And we have both been sort of we have felt the ire of these groups. A group that's been more established and been around for a minute longer is Manhattan Institute. And wondering if you could talk about the part that the Manhattan Institute played in spreading the doom loop narrative.
Yeah, totally. I think it's important to understand that this was both a local strategy to push the doom loop and be like, look at all these problems with San Francisco. This is all because of progressive politicians. And that narrative was happening and being invested in by these political groups at the same time that narrative was being invested in on the national level by conservative groups like the Manhattan Institute, like the Heritage Foundation, that were investing in a narrative saying, look at all these problems in San Francisco. This is what happens when Democrats run your cities.
Yeah.
And those two efforts were simultaneous. They were in support of each other. So at the same time that, particular local conservative commentators think of it like J.J. Smith, who was filming folks in the Tenderloin, or Ricky Wynn, who was also filming folks in the Tenderloin, and then those
filming unhoused people and content farming off of misery, you could say.
Right. People call it poverty porn, misery porn.
Right.
Using that content to then go viral, and then being interviewed by people like
The Fox Newses,
Betty
of the
U,
world.
KTVU, KGO, what have you, and that, and the Chronicle, and being kind of hyped up in that way.
And they become the experts on what's wrong in the city.
Right. And so at the same time that they're being hyped up locally and being put into these positions of being, of having a lot of attention, by these political pressure groups like Neighbors for Better San Francisco, paying $200,000 towards these local conservative media content creators.
Right.
people like Susan Dyer Reynolds, who's part of that, in relationship with J.J. Smith and Ricky Wynn, people like Stanley Roberts, who does filmography. At the same time that that's happening, that they're being brought onto these local stations, they're also being brought on to Jesse Waters' show on Fox News, and brought on as local expert to talk about, all the problems with Gavin Newsom's California, all the problems with liberal San Francisco, and why it should be an example to the rest of the country as to why you should never elect Democrats,
Right.
and why, Joe Biden's America is failing. And Steve Bannon in particular has a great quote where great as in fascinating quote where he's talking about in 2020 being able to recapture the MAGA movement after Trump lost to Biden, to recapture the MAGA movement through winning school board races.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the critical strategies of the Manhattan Institute within this, which is a national organization, it's funded in large part by the Koch brothers, who I think we report, they put in $3.9 billion from 1997 to 2007 into the Manhattan Institute. And the Manhattan Institute has these fellows that go about pushing forward their agenda. The institute itself was founded, I think, in 1978 by retired CIA Director William Casey. And it's very, intentionally they're trying to push and shape public narrative around particular conservative issues. And one issue of particular interest to the Koch brothers has been the charter school movement.
Yep.
And pushing forward, narratives for the what they call the school choice movement, but trying to disparage public education, in particular, kind of assigning the blame of public schools onto public school unions and onto any kind of what they would consider woke indoctrination in the classroom, things like ethnic studies or what have you. And so the role that the Manhattan Institute played within San Francisco's Doom Loop specifically is that there was a Manhattan Institute fellow, and Diane Yap. Yeah,
perhaps?
right, exactly. Diane Yap. It's her locally. We got Chris Rufo nationally, but yeah, Diane Yap, who is a graduate of Lowell High School, and she then begins to organize, in the wake of this attempt by the San Francisco School Board to try to get rid of admissions testing to get into Lowell, which is a public school.
Yeah, so it's like an anti-affirmative action kind of bent that she
Yeah.
takes that, and she is extremely racist. We have gotten into it a little bit over Twitter a while back.
Yeah.
But
a lot of anti-black racism.
Yeah, she is.
Anti-Latina racism.
She is the Asian face of Manhattan Institute, and it is. Yeah, it's really bottom of the barrel racist epithets that she and pointing to stats that she cherry picks to show that separation in the classroom effectively is a good thing,
Right.
Because for example, black people maybe it's a eugenics argument. Black people maybe don't have the capacity to succeed in the same way that Asians do or something. It is eugenics, if you follow it to its logical conclusion. And so they're funding some of this research. They have people like Diane Yap, who's local, working full time to spread these narratives.
Yep. And to try to attack critical, with a key campaign point that Diane Yap was pushing locally, Manhattan Institute was pushing nationally, was around critical race theory.
Yeah.
And that all of a sudden became such a big talking point. It was
Yeah.
CRT, critical race theory in the classroom.
Totally.
Preschoolers being pushed critical race theory and woke ideology.
Yeah.
And Diane Yap was a big person locally in helping to push forward that narrative and say, oh, the school board is woke, it's pushing critical race theory, we need to trying to find whatever leverage she could to get the progressive school board members in San Francisco recalled and kicked out at the same time that they were also working on a very similar campaign in Northern Virginia. And Allison Collins in a previous San Francisco episode talking about the school board recall gets into all of that dynamic of how the Manhattan Institute is like with both all of a sudden there's pictures of Allison Collins at the school board meetings in Northern Virginia with them in Northern Virginia talking about look what happens when leftists take over the school board, and showing a picture of Allison Collins is like the threat of what progressive leadership looks like.
Yeah, so many things going on there. I mean, for example, like you mentioned, like Jesse Waters' show on Fox News, that's gonna have a very specific audience. It's like an older audience. But a lot of those people are the audience still in power. Like Trump, is, I guess, watching Fox News on the daily.
Right.
And so you have like these content creators, influencers, effectively is what Diane's job is sort of to do. Organizer,
yeah. Like she organizes the Lowell Alumni Foundation, which essentially becomes like the space through which, like the organizing hub, through which she begins to organize parents to begin this recall effort against these school board members with the then direct assistance of these local political pressure groups like Grow SF, like Neighbors for Better San Francisco and Together SF, who then join forces with her and tap into conservative billionaire donor networks to help champion this recall effort. And I think just while we're keeping with this like local national relationship, I definitely want to shout out a great article, academic piece that was written in June about this local to national connection in San Francisco, called "The Politics of Revenge: Revanchist Populism in San Francisco and the United States," by two professors at UC Santa Cruz, Gregory Woolston and Catherine Mitchell, that essentially make the same kind of, essentially in an academic argument, make the same case that like there is a revenge politic, from the losses from Trump's loss in 2020, at the same time, and the emergence of this Black Lives Matter movement and the newest iteration of it after George Floyd was murdered, and the defund the police movement, and with the rise of this wave of progressive fervor across the country, and then the elections that came with that, there was conservative America took a big hit.
Yeah.
And so there was this concerted effort nationally that then was localized in places like San Francisco or like New York City or otherwise, by these conservative interests to find a way to push the tide back in their direction. And that's where, they used the doom loop to their advantage to do that. They used, as another episode that you had recently talking about the manufactured, what is it? The like shopping center, like the rise of like shopping centers and shoplifting and mass shoplifting
gangs,
right? That Alarcon-Castanis and Propaganda talks well about how that was also just a manufactured narrative. It wasn't on the rise in this massive way, but that was like an intentional media campaign to like make it be like, oh, this is what happens when you defund the police. You get massive roves of young people breaking into stores.
And this is one of those things where it like there are so many material effects, but to give people just a taste, where do we start with like this kind of narrative? What are the negative effects that it can have?
Right. And for the doom loop and like for like the right-wing narratives, I mean, Yeah, like ultimately it's understanding that the narratives are being used to help bring back their own political power and push power back in their
Right.
direction. And one thing I've been telling folks the last, year plus since we started doing research on this Doom Loop report is that, like, in politics, um, narrative is currency. And like, insofar as, like, if you have the narrative going for you in the political realm, like, that's more than half the battle. So if you have Fox News pushing for years saying illegal immigration is the biggest issue in the United States, and they push that narrative over and over again, then all of a sudden when Trump comes up and is running for president and he says, I'm going to tackle illegal immigration, it's like people are like, oh, thank God someone's doing something about this.
Even if that's not even like on people's minds, like if they're hearing that this is the number one issue in America right now, then I guess
who's going to save us? And that's this. You saw a similar thing with San Francisco. You push the crime narrative over and over and over again, and say, "Oh, this is all because of these progressives," and then that not only helps them to be able to recall the progressives, like the recall of Chesapeake, like the recall of the school board members, but it also helps you then get your own, conservative people elected who are then running on those talking points of, like, I am going to stop the doom loop because I'm going to crack down on crime. I'm going to, crack down on drug use. I'm going to crack down on, I'm going to build a lot of buildings, which is going to get rid of the housing crisis. So they set up the narrative and then they present the candidates to help solve it.
Right.
And that's the 1-2 punch.
It's really about control. It is about control. And nationally they were able to squeeze more out of the reputation that San Francisco still has as this really left-wing, progressives only haven, even though, we know that we have more tech oligarchs locally than most places. So it's just not that simple.
And we had a self-described moderate mayor, conservative Democrat mayor at this same time, who somehow, it wasn't her fault, it was the fault of a handful of, recently elected supervisors that all of a sudden things are falling apart. It's the selective, blame.
Right. Yeah, because they weren't allies of the people who were trying to take power, the pro-charter school people, for example, didn't have their people on the board of supervisors. They want that to happen. The report shows how individuals with platforms that are connected to power and money can have a huge effect on public perception, I think is a major takeaway. You mentioned Roland Lee earlier. Who is Roland Lee? Who is Heather Knight? I don't know that we may have mentioned these names on the podcast before, but it's been a minute. So who are they and how have they contributed to the Doom Loop narrative?
Yeah, totally. So Roland Lee is the real estate reporter for the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, as well as also, and then Heather Knight is a former reporter, crime, politics, culture reporter, also for the San Francisco Chronicle. San Francisco Chronicle traditionally has been, or at least in the last, however many decades, has been the most kind of preeminent newspaper in San Francisco, owned by the Hearst family, which is, you can take us back to the first Gilded Age. Talk about the Hearst.
Rosebud. And thinking back, this is, so many directions you could take the Hearst family, Hearst Castle, Patty Hearst.
Right.
But
also major real estate owners.
That's for the purposes of this conversation, they own large parts of downtown San Francisco,
Yep.
commercial real estate.
Yep. And so Roland Lee, as the real estate reporter, plays an important role through the newspaper in, pushing forward their real estate narratives about, things being good times to buy, bad times to buy. Look at how great downtown is. Let's cover, uh, all the things that could be of benefit, basically, to the Hearst family's real estate holdings.
So this
more or
narrative is potentially of great benefit to the Hearst family if they, use it in the right way.
Right.
And they were able to, weaponize it for the purposes of attempting to, for example, get the city to invest more in downtown.
Yep. And make it easier for conversions from to do conversions from offices to housing.
To give free rent to businesses that decided to open in this area that was pretty desolate.
Yep. And then also to have any new, one of the big parts of what Daniel Lurie's pushed forward is like all new construction basically in downtown not having to abide by affordable housing
Right.
Building requirements, which is
Right.
one of the major concessions that was won through progressives being on the board of supervisors, as well as just like anti-gentrification activism and its successes from 2015 to 2020 was getting these concessions to say, okay, if you're going to build new developments, you have to have X amount of affordable units as part of that. Another important point about Roland Lee is that he is very close with Mary Jung.
Yeah.
And Mary Jung is like one of the most preeminent politicos in San Francisco over the last 2 decades, and really kind of like was such an important architect of what we consider the AstroTurf network. She's the political director for the San Francisco Association of Realtors, which is always kind of represented the classic right wing of the Bay Area in San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's like, just explicitly pushing forward whatever is good for real estate interests. Her protege, Jay Chang, was political director for the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, which is the other hand of traditional conservative San Francisco in promoting business interests.
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm gonna do a podcast coming up with a friend Trung who writes about Asian landlords specifically.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
So
a lot there.
Watch for that. Heather Knight, to me, will always be the person who created the term open air drug markets.
Yep.
And wrote it all the way to the New York Times.
Yep, totally. Well, and
where
just
she works now.
Just to wrap up the Roland Lee bit really quickly, it's just
Sorry.
no, all good. Just to say that, his relationship with Mary Jung was incredibly important. With Mary Jung being able to use him as a media mouthpiece to help them push forward policies that were good for the San Francisco Association of Realtors. And part of that was her and William Obendorf, Republican mega donor, billionaire, charter school advocate, creating this organization, Neighbors for Better San Francisco, which then was the organization through which both the school board recall was launched through, as well as also the Chesapeake recall was launched through. And she herself was the leader of that Chesapeake recall effort, of which they raised, almost $10 million to recall this district attorney, and raised, I think over $5 million for the school board recalls, which is just unprecedented sums of money for a recall effort on the local level. So
some of the biggest, these are setting records in terms of local race recalls.
Totally. Amount of fundraising going into it. And, and then through that way, Mary Jung was really one of the first people we saw in San Francisco to really cement this relationship, and part of it is through her relationship with people like Gary Tan and David Sachs, David Sachs has gone on to become Trump's crypto czar and AI czar, but cementing this relationship between real estate and business interests and those, the San Francisco Association of Realtors spending, San Francisco Forward, which is the Chamber of Commerce's political committee spending, bringing those together with tech billionaire money. Billionaire venture capitalists like Arthur Rock, like William Obendorf, like Gary Tan and Y Combinator, and cementing that relationship. So she played this critical role in like bringing those two different forces together, to push forward this AstroTurf network.
Yeah, and the important
and Roland Lee then being her in with the Chronicle to help like champion that like doom loop narrative and champion those narratives within the media landscape.
Yeah, no, it's wild how much sway that, you know, one or two of these journalists can have. And I fully, I credit y'all at the Phoenix Project for like bringing these names to my attention, like William Oberndorf, another local billionaire who you've done a bit of work on. There's another report you put out in the past charting like some of these major players in terms of donations, like who's funding these campaigns.
Right.
William Oberndorf, a big MAGA donor to all of these.
Totally. Well, and I'll say, just to wrap up then, the Heather Knight piece, because you did ask me who she was, and I think it's worthwhile to highlight her.
Sorry,
for a second.
I'm being a bad host.
You're moving it forward, but I want to be able to answer the questions, and then we're working through it. We're working through it. I want to say just quickly on Heather Knight. She was incredibly influential in pushing forward, you know, kind of playing like a Barry Weiss kind of role as like San Francisco had you know, Heather Knight being the Barry Weiss of the New York Times at the same time.
Barry Weiss is former New York Times, now CBS News, the Free Press.
Founded the Free Press, yeah.
She's very like libertarian Zionist who is married to a local like socialite.
Yep. Who also wrote a very important piece about the doom loop.
Nellie Bowles.
Yes, exactly. And was also, in a similar way, responsible for helping to push forward the doom loop narrative within the Atlantic. And, you know, and then you also had, Nate Haller, who wrote a piece for the New Yorker that was also very influential about the San Francisco doom loop. So it was like, once you got the ball rolling and being like, creating, using the doom loop to become a dominant narrative, which Heather Knight was part of, talking about open air drug markets, really closely covering any instance of crime in the city. And there were a few notable, you know, big stories about specific crimes that happened. I mean, be it like the Hanako Abe's, you know, murder by Troy McAllister, who, you know, was drunk driving on parole. That became a huge sensationalized story. There was the South Asian elder who was pushed over and died in the Richmond. And that became a huge story.
And these stories become like national news, even international news. Totally. They end up on these, like, you know, on a Joe Rogan that's listened to all over the world. And it became like, San Francisco became like, I don't know if meme is the right word, but it was pretty like much. You know, like the San Francisco crime became like a sort of meme of its own.
Totally.
I remember my friend was getting like texts from his dad about like things that were happening in San Francisco for a period of a couple of years that was basically, he had been watching Fox News.
Yep.
He'd pick up his phone and text about whatever was on Fox News at the time. And a lot of Fox News content was San Francisco oriented.
Yep, exactly. And so like Heather Knight playing this local job, basically every time there was a crime, essentially chalking it up to Chesa Boudin and, you know, kind of his failed policies as a district attorney, which, you know, it reached into the realm of just like political hit pieces, essentially coming from her. And then, you know, she did apparently such a good job in pushing forward these kind of tough on crime narratives, and that she was able to land a job with the New York Times and then left the Chronicle, and now she's the sort of San Francisco based reporter for the Times. But yeah, but like all these people have played these like critical roles within the media, in helping to, and then we mentioned as well quickly before, but like Betty Yu, Diane Lim, reporting for local Fox News affiliates, KTVU, were all essential as being the spokespeople locally to talk about and hype up these narratives,
right?
These hyper crime narratives. But then it gets turned around and picked up by national news, by Fox News National,
right?
And like the Epoch Times, or
totally
other there's the California Insider,
which is part of the Epoch Times, which is part of which is funded through like Falun Gong,
yep.
the
you guys have a good episode
Chinese
about that as well,
anti-communist cult,
right. And so it's like it is operating in this ecosystem that then is explicitly politicized and then used towards political ends.
Sure. But presented as just very objective news.
Right, exactly.
To people who are, not maybe media literate enough to understand that these stories are being told to them with a particular right-wing point of view.
Yep, exactly.
So adjacent to the Heather Knights and Roland Lees of the world are content creators and influencers. Also, I mean, kind of people, on the edge. I guess I'm on the edge of that. Like I have done like more traditional journalism, and now I'm doing a lot of online short videos. We have a web of people that have been on Twitter hammering home some of the same points that the doom loop narrative was trying to spread. I don't know. You want to pick a couple of them? Yeah.
I mean, there's a few in San Francisco that have played really important roles, but I think that like there was an infrastructural investment in pushing forward right-wing narratives in San Francisco through both this $100,000 investment, so to speak, contract between Neighbors for a Better San Francisco and Susan Dyer Reynolds, who is a former Marina Times editor, now holds I think both like co-ownership but also editorial position within The Voice of San Francisco, which is her newer project. And then her kind of larger ecosystem that exists from her, which has been called Gotham by the Bay, was kind of a previous iteration of name. They've gone through a couple of different name changes, but it included kind of these people that are close in her network. So it was like, this $100,000 to her and $100,000 to Stanley Roberts, who's his videographer, who formerly did a series called People Behaving Badly. That, just basically like catching people in the act of doing crime or whatever.
Right.
Gotcha kind of videos.
Totally.
Like before, like viral gotcha videos before viral, internet viral videos were a thing.
Yeah, totally. And kind of, I mean, it's scaremongering.
Right, exactly. And so these two together, you got this $200,000 from Neighbors for Better San Francisco. You also then had another $59,000 that came in through Jason Calacanis, who is a member of the All In podcasts, which is the podcast that's run by before mentioned David Sachs, Jason, Chamath Palihapitiya, and they're all venture capitalists together in mostly Silicon Valley, San Francisco, who also notably went all in for Trump. Jason himself is kind of back and forth, but definitely they've all kind of collectively gone very far to the right the last few years. And so Jason did this big fundraising effort to raise money to hire a journalist to take down Chesa. And that's the money they raised from that $60,000 then went on to Susan Dyer Reynolds. And then that money, once it came to her and Stanley Roberts, then got redistributed towards contributing writers and also content creators
I guess I didn't
in her
know
network.
about that part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're all part of this like Gotham by the Bay network, which included to different levels, but included Tom Wolfe, who was himself being paid and running this kind of failed nonprofit, being backed by Michael Schellenberger, who was a former California governor, formerly had run for California governor.
Tom Wolfe is it. So if Heather Knight is the open air drug markets person, Tom
Right.
Wolfe is the one who said that the potential closing of Macy's downtown is San Francisco's 9/11.
Yeah, totally. And and he's been a local champion for getting rid of both like safe injection sites and policies like that, but also
Yeah.
even on a larger scale, getting rid of the
Any harm reduction kind of
yeah.
programs. Like he's very abstinence only. Salvation Army is like one of the organizations that he works with a lot.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be honest, so Salvation Army known for like supporting conversion therapy among the homosexuals, and it's there is a lot that I could say there, but so
Yeah.
Tom Wolfe, one of the people in this
Yep.
web,
and he became incredibly influential, region, like both locally, but then regionally, and then and part of this kind of Schellenberger connected network nationally to help push for the end of housing first, to push for the end of housing first policy, to push for the end of harm reduction policies.
Right.
And push instead for this sort of like abstinence based
punitive
and more punitive
police,
approach to dealing with both housing crisis, but also like substance abuse crisis.
And he was friends with Ricky Wynn,
right? And Ricky Wynn was also part of this network, who was we mentioned before, kind of poverty porn. JJ Smith, similarly poverty porn type of folks who just had their camera and were specifically, would take videos of people going through the throes of withdrawal,
right,
or, smoking on the street or what have you, and then churn that into viral content to then be pushed out nationally.
And Ricky, like Tom, both used their own personal narratives as like drug users to
former drug users
to
rehabilitated and doing good for society. And so Ricky Wynn became this like right hand man of Daniel Lurie during his campaign. Daniel Lurie was really championing him and stuff. And then not too much later after that, he gets arrested for alleged child pornography and sex trafficking. And JJ himself has been caught up in legal issues as well, threatening a journalist in the East Bay. Kevin Jones, Doom Loop Dispatch. I
think has a restraining order.
Against him. Like caught up in his own variety of legal issues. And then also people in the East Bay like Seneca Scott, who are also part of this Gotham by the Bay. He starts his own Gotham Oakland channel, and and for him also similarly pushing forward Doom Loop kind of content, Doom Loop narrative stuff in Oakland, for the sake of political gains and political wins. On his end, it was towards the recalling of the mayor Sheng Tao, who was a progressive, recalling of the progressive district attorney Pamela Price. But in a very kind of similar way is what we saw strategy-wise in San Francisco.
Totally.
Creating a narrative, a tough on crime narrative, a doom loop narrative, and then saying this is all because of the progressives, and the only way to beat it is to vote for tough on crime candidates.
Right. With some of the same rich funders, right?
With some of the same, with like Gary Tan. Gary Tan was incredibly important in also, uplifting Susan Dyer Reynolds' work, uplifting JJ's work, and to your point before, like using Twitter as this kind of hub to help manufacture this virality, independent of mainstream media, but you had a point still, before Twitter became, pretty disavowed as being a legitimate source for news from reporters. It used to be that, like, you get 100, 200, 300, 400,000 views on a local story, and then that to reporters means that this is a real story.
Right,
Like, there's
right,
something
right.
really happening here, and then they feel obliged to then pick it up and
Totally.
report on it. And that's what they're able to do very effectively. They're able to create this sort of network of these sort of conservative activists who would all be sharing each other's stuff, ballooning their own following counts, and also boosting their posts. To then manufacture stories that then, they get big enough, and all of a sudden they end up on Fox News.
Yeah, and then have these material consequences, like not only the increasing spends on police, police overtime, but also, I mean, I would attribute like the death of Banko Brown to this narrative, like these narrative spreaders. Banko Brown being the person that was killed at a Walgreens downtown a couple years back, for taking some candy or something like that. Something that the DA, who was put in after Chesa Boudin was recalled, Brooke Jenkins, basically was acting as if this was like an affront to Walgreens, that Banko had died in their store.
Right. And, Brooke Jenkins herself really, she's only in the position that she's in because of the success of the AstroTurf network, because of the success of this doom loop narrative.
Yeah.
Because she was, working in Chesa Boudin's office as a district attorney. She left the office to go lead the recall effort against Boudin.
She got paid, to do that.
Like hundreds of thousands of dollars by Neighbors for Better San Francisco to theoretically write a report that never was written, and then volunteer on the campaign to recall Chesa that she was working on full time.
Yeah.
Which they then had an ethics violation over, and had to pay large, significant fines over misreporting of Brooke Jenkins's roles in these campaigns. But all to be said, it was because of the successful recall of Chesa that then Brooke Jenkins was appointed as his predecessor, or as not predecessor, but follower, as district attorney. And to her own point, William Obendorf, we talked about this in our piece, William Obendorf had a conversation with Chesa early on when he was elected about Sanctuary City, and saying, if you help undo San Francisco's new, Sanctuary City policy, which had been in place for decades now, if you help to undo it, then he won't go against Boudin. And Boudin refused to work with him on that, and so then Obendorf then kind of was like, all right, well, I'm going to take you out. I'm going to find a way to get you out of office. And I think that in a lot of ways, what we've seen with, the way in which ICE has been operating, uninhibited in San Francisco. And, there's been some qualitative statements by people like Jenkins or Daniel Lurie or, whoever, that have been supported by the AstroTurf network, against ICE or against, these mass deportations. But I think in very real terms, having people like Brooke Jenkins as district attorney currently and not Chesa Boudin has made it much more easy for organizations like ICE and other federal agencies to be operating and arresting people in San Francisco.
Right. And when they are, blathering about how they don't support ICE, I mean, they're just reading the room. That's just being politically adept, I guess, because all of their actions, that there's no action really to support that they don't want ICE here in this sanctuary city. They've, like the police are supposed to not be aiding ICE, but they certainly were back in June, arresting so many protesters, and they're to basically protect the ICE vigilantes.
Right, exactly.
So in the report, a third group that I'll ask you to speak a little bit about is community groups that are quote unquote community groups, I should say, like fan favorite Manny's, are highlighted in the map. Can we talk about how these quote unquote community groups are implicated in spreading the doom loop narrative, and kind of how they harness energy from community to fuel the right's agenda?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think in the like flow of power and money and energy, coming from these right wing donors, people like Obendorf, who himself is close with Mitch McConnell and national Republican. You know, you've got from him down to his political pressure organizations, Neighbors for a Better San Francisco, now Blueprint for a Better San Francisco, which is a former Together SF that folded back into Neighbors for a Better San Francisco, and then Grow SF as these and then now also more recently Abundance Network over the last few cycles. They've become these local political pressure groups that kind of self-describe themselves as grassroots movements of San Franciscans who just care about safety, public safety, or we just care about well-functioning public schools, as a parent action, which we talk about as well in the report. But really these are just they're backed by these very political right-wing leaning donors and are existing to implement their agenda. From those key, more central AstroTurf groups, you've got a lot of other sort of offshoots and other groups that are kind of embedded in different ways into the community, into San Francisco. I think one that we highlight is the role of Dear Community, which is a Chinese American organizing outfit based largely in the Richmond, but also with connections with Chinatown. Our aforementioned Mary Jung and Jay Chang serve as the kind of heads of the board for that group. And the folks that have organized within Dear Community have, in some ways has become kind of like a farm system or farm team for the AstroTurf network. People like Forrest Liu, who is one of the founders of Dear Community, then goes from Dear Community to then working with Together SF, being a contractor with Neighbors for a Better San Francisco, and then working on Marjan Philhauer's campaign. You have Jade 2, who also was a co-founder there, who then goes on to being the AstroTurf pick for the Democratic Central Control Committee, DCCC, San Francisco Democratic Party, that she wins that seat in March of 2024. She then goes on to run Mark Farrell's campaign as Mark Farrell's campaign manager. So, this role of, and there's a few other folks as well in Dear Community who have, also gone on to work for Together SF or Grow SF or what have you.
Yeah, Democratic Central County Committee?
County Committee, yeah, exactly. DCCC. And so, yeah, so that's Dear Community playing a role. Manny's has played an important role as well as being a hub for community conversations, basically, that have intentionally uplifted the doom loop narrative and uplifted the politicians who are pushing that narrative forward.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about, so another group in addition to Manny's, like refuse,
yeah.
and Manny's, they kind of hook people who have energy to they want to like get to know their neighbors. They want to do something that's good. That they are hosting these like basically like litter cleanups,
Yep,
trash
totally.
cleanups, and kind of could you talk about why that benefits this network?
Yep, totally. Yeah, so these like Manny's would do these like I think they call them like disco trash cleanups or whatever,
Right.
which is like sponsored by Refuse, and Refuse itself is basically like a branch out of Together SF, which was kind of Michael Moritz's personal political pressure group that is, like you mentioned, it's gone under, like it's now failed. But it was run by Kanishka Chang, who is a former London Breed aide, who is also the wife of Jay Chang, who is the director of Neighbors for Better San Francisco.
Yeah.
And they would do these trash cleanups, and it was like, within the idea of astroturfing, it's like, basically like presenting themselves as if they're community-based groups. One way to do that, like you just were talking about, is saying, oh, like, let's do like essentially like mutual aid type of stuff, or like let's do like, let's help the community. So they started doing these like localized trash cleanups and organizing them across the city, utilizing Department of
Public Works,
Department of Public Works resources to be able to do these trash cleanups.
Yeah.
But then what they would do is harvest and then like they would have these like happy hours and stuff after the cleanup. So it's like, oh, like clean up your neighborhood, then like meet your neighbors and
Sounds great.
Have some drinks. Sounds great and well funded. But then they turn around and take your emails from the people who sign up to do it and basically like harvest them to Together SF. So like they send your emails to Together SF, and now all of a sudden you're on Together SF's email lists, and now you're getting their emails to like join their Politics 101 course at Manny's with Jill and Gardio.
It was never about the litter.
It was never about the litter. It was just like a way to bring people in
Yeah.
who are politically engaged, who are potentially community engaged and potentially politically engaged.
Yeah.
Who might then turn around and go canvass for them. For their candidates.
And that's where I'm like, yeah, we just, I mean, and there are other groups. I mean, I would rather those people, if they have that energy to do something community minded, I mean, there just needs to be other kind of groups to be able to take that in. And there's plenty of them.
Right. It's a difference between like the community cleanup through refuse versus like Food Not Bombs.
Sure.
Sure.
Like
think about ways to actually, help the community.
Totally.
But
ethics
that are aligned with genuine community support.
Totally. And not just a way to harvest email addresses and get people sort of stuck in this like political echo chamber, I guess you could say.
And towards conservative political gains.
The report is called The Rise and Fall of the San Francisco Doom
Yes.
Loop. What are some indications that this narrative doesn't really have the same purchase as it did a few years ago, at least in San Francisco?
Yeah. So there's a few things. I mean, I think off the bat, the Doom Loop narrative, like you mentioned, was kind of like coined in 2022 and really rode the waves of like, it had staying power in San Francisco specifically, both because of the offices being empty, but also like there had been this like uptick in violent crimes and uptick in property crimes. And it wasn't as, like I mentioned before, you look at the 30-year picture, 50-year picture, was not much of an uptick. And it wasn't much of an uptick, but it was enough of an uptick that they were able to manufacture a lot of like grand fear around like, oh my God, like crimes out of control, this and that.
Paired with, like
look at
videos of, some kids taking
Right.
some candy
Right.
at Walgreens.
Right.
Or something.
You pair the videos with the data points, and then also with all the stress from the pandemic,
Right.
from the lockdown period.
Yeah.
And people are just at home watching these fucking videos and
Totally.
scrolling all day, and their kids aren't in school. It's just like there's a lot of just compounded stressors in that period. And so I think that the paranoia and the mania that was able to be manufactured during that time was very effective.
Totally.
And you saw the effectiveness in term as it related then to the political gains that they were able to make off of that narrative.
Yeah.
I think once the crime rates started to drop, like it rose like 2021 to 2022, but then, or sorry, it rose like kind of like 2021 to 2023, there was this rise, and then after 2023, it really started to drop off again. And I think, and also the offices started reopening downtown, more activity started happening. A lot of the lockdown era policies of not being in person, like in offices and stuff, and like fear around engaging in close quarters kind of like went away. And I think a lot of just like people started being outside more and stopped and started seeing with their own eyes like what was going on. And like I think it was a really interesting bit in the Nate Heller piece in 2023 from the New Yorker, where it was a long piece, and he very much did echo a lot of the concerns of the doom loop. But he himself talked about the discrepancy that he felt in San Francisco between what he was being told about the city from politicians like Matt Dorsey or Joe Longardio that he was talking to, in contrast to what he was seeing on the ground, where he was like, yeah, like I'm riding the bus and I'm going to like the Haight and I'm going to like, the Sunset, and I'm going,
I haven't been shot yet.
Right. And even like checking out Soma, and it's
Yeah.
like he was like, what I'm being told about San Francisco versus what I'm seeing in San Francisco seem like two very different things. And then ultimately he talks to like one of like the city's economists, who essentially is like, yeah, no, like things actually haven't changed all that much. Like things are still going pretty steady with like a couple little blips.
And you see, like there's a whole niche of content on TikTok of like people just being like, oh, I thought that San Francisco was going to be like Zombieland, ghost town, no matter where you went. And here I am, and it's kind of nice.
Right. Here I am in like North Beach, and it's like bustling.
Right.
And it's like, it seems like it's fine.
Right.
So I think that there was this once people started being back in person more, there was this like, cognitive dissonance of like, wait, like I'm being told it's falling apart, but it's not. It doesn't feel like it's falling apart. So there was like, I think that helped to blow a hole in the narrative, and in like more real terms. And I think that also like you had that paired with some of the politicians who were invested in pushing that narrative forward, all of a sudden changed tune when it came to their own elections. So people like London Breed, who was, the mayor during this period, she was all in. She was 10 toes down in pushing forward that like this doom loop was happening, that like everything, all these crime and drug use and all that stuff is out of control, and blaming and pushing all that blame onto the progressive members of the Board of Supervisors for causing this. People like Dean Preston, people like Aaron Peskin, people like Connie Chan, Hillary Ronen. To then turn around but when it was up for her own election, she's like, actually, like 6 months before, November 2024, she's like, actually, doom loop's over. Like, I mean, it's actually, we did it, Joe. Like we solved the problem. It's all over now. I mean, and it's all thanks to me.
Absurd because she had been in office for something for a decade by that time, if you count like her supervisorial.
Oh yeah, totally.
Years,
right?
And so it's like, okay, well, if we can't blame any other politician, like who are we gonna blame? And yeah, so all of a sudden that she changed.
Right, and there was this dissonance that all of a sudden existed within the AstroTurf network, where it was like, well, like London Breed's saying it's not happening anymore,
Right.
but then Marjan Philhauer in the Richmond is running on that it's like very much still happening, and that she's going to be the strong woman to
Like
come
they
and save the
didn't
day.
line up their narratives exactly.
Right. So
Yeah.
so that dissonance, I think, also helped deflate some of the energy from the doom loop narrative,
Yeah.
and take some of the like wind out of the sails. And then now, once we hit 2025, with Daniel Lurie being elected, from day one that he got elected, he started pushing a really big PR campaign to be like, doom loop's over, it's done, it's dead. Now we're in the boom loop, and
Yeah.
now we're in the boom, and he literally calls it the boom loop. Gary Tan also calls it the boom loop, and they're like, things are all better now because Daniel Lurie is in office and because he says so, and like,
Yeah.
look at his TikTok videos, and he's talking about how great things are now, and like, don't worry, everything's great.
It's a vibe, yeah.
And so it's the whole thing's a vibe. It's like when Fox News in 2024 started talking about, nationally crime rates were way, way down. And then they're like, well, like crime rates are down, but it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel that way.
Right,
And it's
right,
like,
right.
yeah, because the entire thing is a narrative. It's a vibe much more than it is about facts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's all gone into this, like, both the propagation of the doom loop is the vibe of it, and then now in this like boom loop or post doom loop, it's also a vibe. And things like the Civic Joy Fund, and these like outdoor concert series and like street activations and all of that are all there to help in a similar way manufacture this like good vibes, like San Francisco's "Let's go San Francisco, we're totally back, things are great" kind of energy, that serves Lurie's narrative. Not, none of that negates the fact that now San Francisco has the highest poverty rate of any city in the Bay Area. None of that discounts the fact that evictions have been rising to like all-time highs this year, and housing costs have been ballooning. All things that are, and also unemployment rates have been increasing, and poverty rates are, I've already mentioned the poverty rate bit, but like all these indicators that like people are struggling in a really serious way right now in the city. But like, that's not the one. Those facts are inconvenient to Daniel Lurie's boom loop narrative, where he wants more Blackstone investments and other big industries to continue to invest, and that's what he sees as the city doing well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes.
New era, new vibe.
Right.
New narrative.
For sure. And yeah, one last question. So if the doom loop is dead, if it has fallen here, where are you seeing the term doom loop being unleashed outside of the Bay? Because it hasn't died in St. Louis, for example. Like I remember seeing in April 2024, there was a Wall Street Journal article about how St. Louis was going through its own doom loop.
Yep. I mean, I've talked to reporters, and there's a couple of reporters that I named in our conversation just now that I reached out to and had conversations about their doom loop pieces, focusing on San Francisco during this era, this 2022, 2023 era, to ask them, like, do they have any regrets? Do they have like any hindsight on it? And one of the better conversations I had with someone who was writing for a national outlet, we talked about, I'm like, yeah, like, the increasing and violent crime and property crime rates, be it a relatively small increase at the grand scheme of things, but that increase that we saw happened all across the country, happened in cities across the country. So they were talking about, this crime rate increase in Sacramento, in LA, in New York, in Chicago, in Des Moines, Iowa, in Kansas City, Missouri, all in cities across the country, because it was happening across the country, irregardless of how progressive or conservative the district attorney was, irregardless of how high the effective taxation rate was on corporate real estate. It was all happening. It was part of a national phenomenon that had kind of these like localized characteristics, and as such, it was the point I tried to make to them was like, it was kind of some journalistic malpractice, essentially, to try to make it seem as though like, oh, this is just a San Francisco issue, or this is just a New York City issue, or this is just a St. Louis issue, and not some sort of national issue where politicians locally are trying to work on it and adapt to it and push back against it. But there's something larger in the water here, macroeconomic climate. And, which a lot of ways you could point to, like, the pulling away of chips, pulling away of like child income tax credit, and pulling away of, the pandemic stimulus and unemployment stimuluses that happened, and what the impact of that rug pulling effect economically on people, especially low income people and working class people across the country.
Yeah.
That was the macroeconomic context, but they want to focus on, as it happens within politics, they want to put the microscope on locally, and everyone's trying to figure out how to use the phenomenons that are going on for political gain. So it becomes this localized political fight. So they're like, okay, how can we use this as conservatives? How can we use this to take down progressives?
Right.
Especially. And it can also go vice versa, but still. So it's unsurprising that you're seeing, the same phenomenon that happened of conservatives trying to use this doom loop narrative to take down progressives in San Francisco, that we also saw it happening in New York, and that was part of the energy that got Eric Adams elected in New York City as mayor, that he ran on a tough on crime platform to be like, look at the crime and disorder that's happened since the defund the police movement. We need someone like who was a former police captain to come in and like be a strong man, which is a similar energy that Trump was able to win, able to ultimately win on in 2024. And people have told me in New York how, like, even just like since Zohran has been elected, which granted he hasn't even, stepped into Gracie's mansion yet. He hasn't actually become mayor yet of New York City, which happens January 1st. But nonetheless, he is now, and I'm not sure when this episode's going to air. Maybe we'll have been after that. But regardless, he is now already being targeted with similar kind of doom loop narrative stuff.
Right.
Like people being like, oh, be it everything from like he's bringing Sharia law to New York City, and look at the rise of anti-Semitism since Zohran's been elected or something like that. Using like trying to paint him in that picture all the way to, look, crime rates are up, criminals are emboldened. Which we saw that explicitly in Andrew Cuomo. He had that AI slop advertisement.
Zohran,
It was an anti-Zohran ad that literally was like videos of like folks going in to like conduct armed robberies because they're like, I'm voting for Zohran. He's gonna like decriminalize police killings.
All the locks are unlocked, so we can go in and take everything we want.
Exactly, which is all in support of the doom loop narrative to say, oh well, look, crime's out of control. That's what you get when you elect a progressive. Everywhere too, and people don't talk about this enough with San Francisco, but everywhere too, like essentially like the police refusing to do their jobs, like what happened with Chesa Boudin, because as soon as Chesa Boudin gets elected and then decides to go and prosecute a cop who killed an unarmed person, and Chesa Boudin moves to prosecute that police officer. Essentially police officers decided, okay, like we're just going to walk out.
Right.
Like,
Right.
we're gonna stop doing our jobs because
We have a political. We differ.
they basically like quiet quit. Like they went on strike, ostensibly.
Yeah.
And they would show up after the fact at places that had been, I know one shop owner who had her ATM taken 3 times over a period of like 2 years in the hate, and the cops would show up and they'd be like, well, we would do something, but with Chesa Boudin as the DA, our hands are tied.
It's like mafia talk.
Mafia.
Really.
I mean, it's almost as if the police are being the police. It's a consistent. We've seen that trend over decades.
Totally.
In appeasement. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. So if you are watching this or listening to this outside of SF, just beware.
Yeah. It could be mobilized against any city, as it has been, for years now.
Yeah. The tough on crime thing. It's something we have seen before.
Right.
And yeah, it's important to be aware of because it'll probably loop back at some point.
Yep.
So okay, how do people get the report? Which is a quick read, but there's like a lot of good information packed into 20-some pages.
Thank you. So free download on our website, phoenixprojectnow.com. We have a reports tab. You click on that. We've got our Phoenix Papers volume 1 through 3 there that you can download as well, which kind of documents the rise of these AstroTurf groups and the funders behind them that we've alluded to throughout this conversation. We also have past episodes talking a bit about that research. And then this Doom Loop report as well is available for free download, as well as also just like the map by itself of the the visualization of the different players that were financially and also interconnected in pushing forward the Doom Loop narrative in San Francisco. So yeah, check out our website, phoenixprojectnow.com, download the report.
Yeah, these people need to be more famous than they already are. And yeah, I appreciate y'all's work in bringing them into the light.
Of course.
A lot of them do not want to have a public facing role. Some of them do, like the Gary Tans of the world.
Right.
But anyway, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Of course.
We'll see you again soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Toshio.
Thank you for listening to the show, and especially thank you to everyone who is contributing over at patreon.com/Sad Francisco. You're making it possible for Sad Francisco to exist. And if you're not already a member, think about joining. Again, it's patreon.com/Sad Francisco.